No one said anything at first. 20 alien cadets stood in a neat semicircle on the blistering shale plains of Zeta V, their shimmering survival kits humming quietly behind them, each one a masterpiece of cross-species engineering. 57 items, precisely calibrated for extreme environments, from atmospheric ion scrubbers to nutrient-encoded hydration gel. And then there was Jack. Standing at the edge of the group in dusty boots and a faded jacket, he unceremoniously pulled a single item from his belt and held it up, a carbon steel survival knife, worn smooth at the grip and not even retractable. "This should cover it," he said. A long silence followed. The wind picked up a little, hot and dry, blowing a thin stream of ash across the landing site. A trainee from the Kirnath species, tall, skeletal, and visibly horrified, finally broke the silence. "Your survival kit is a blade?" Jack looked at it, then back at them. "It's a very good blade." Someone muttered something about human fatalism. Another quietly activated their terrain scanner, as if to make sure this wasn't some part of the exercise. Behind them, the dropship's engines kicked off. The training mission had officially begun. No takebacks, no extra gear. Jack sheathed the knife and adjusted his pack, which, as far as anyone could tell, contained only jerky, a roll of bandages, and maybe socks. "Well," he said, squinting toward the horizon, "let's hope none of you drop your medkits." No one laughed. They didn't know it yet, but in 3 days, they'd all be following the guy with the knife. And in 3 weeks, they'd be alive because of him. The first 24 hours were easy. They set up camp on the rocky ridge of Sector 12, where temperatures held steady just below habitable norms. The alien cadets, a patchwork of species from across the Galactic Coalition, established shelters with elegant precision. Their kits unfurled like origami thermal domes, atmospheric shields, autosynth kitchens. A trio from the aquatic Tralchi species even set up a moisture condenser to maintain hydration in their gill slits. Jack walked about 20 meters off, dug a shallow pit with the heel of his boot, stacked stones around it, and began building a lean-to with 3 ribbed fronds and a thermal blanket from his pocket. He didn't ask for help. No one offered. The mission commander, a Biran tactician named Velhar, watched Jack for a long while before turning back to monitor biosigns and survey drone feedback. His report logs flagged the human as a high-risk anomaly. Low preparedness, overconfident, lacking sufficient trauma response equipment. By noon, the wind shifted. Zeta V's infamous sky began bruising at the edges, a warning the cadets registered through their integrated HUDs. Precipitation likelihood increasing, their systems said. Atmospheric instability at 12%. Jack looked up at the sky, licked his thumb, and held it in the air. "Rain by tomorrow," he murmured. "Acidic, if we're lucky." A cadet from the bulbous-eyed Fulani species approached him during rations, curiosity overriding caution. "Why only the blade?" the Fulani asked, gesturing to Jack's belt. "Because it works," Jack said, around a mouthful of something he'd seared over his pit fire. "But no nanowoven shelter? No protein reprocessor? Not even a hydropulse beacon?" "I've got a knife. I'll make do. But, statistically," Jack held up a hand, "stats don't survive, people do." The Fulani walked away, visibly rattled. That night, a Kirnath cadet named Relam tripped an alert perimeter while setting his nutrient pods. Jack rose without a word and reset the pressure sensor with a stone and some tightly bound fibrous grass, then walked back to his lean-to without comment. Relam just stared at the reset trap for a while before heading to his polished humming shelter. 36 hours in, Zeta V made good on its promise. The monsoon didn't arrive as gentle rainfall. It slammed down in sheets, caustic, electromagnetic, and hot enough to melt synthetic polymer. Shelters sizzled and buckled. Several cadets were thrown back by flash ion strikes as their atmospheric shields failed. Jack's leaned held up for 32 minutes before he dragged the whole thing beneath a shallow rock outcropping he'd scouted earlier that morning, muttering, "Yup, knew this had come early." A scream pierced the storm. Cadets scrambled toward the source. A cadet from the Atheru species writhed on the ground, blue foam bubbling from one side of his neck. His arm was stiff, locked in spasm, with a glistening welt the size of a dinner plate throbbing beneath the skin. "Thermal wasp," Velhar barked, trying to pull out a neural calming patch from his now glitching med pod. It failed to activate. Another cadet, stumbling in the dark and acid mist, fell into a sinkhole. The sharp crack of impact and a gasping groan told them enough, possibly fractured ribs. Panic started to fray their well-trained edges. Shelter protocols failed, auto-med systems shorted from atmospheric interference, nutrient processors sparked and shut down. The 57-item kits melted into expensive debris. Jack stepped into the chaos. He ran toward the stung cadet, pulling the knife from his belt. "We need to get that venom slowed down, or he's going into full neural shock," he said. Velhar blinked. "With what? We've lost field sterilization, and our analgesics are gone." Jack had already pulled a gelatinous mushroom from his pocket and dropped it into a small tin cup. He scraped in dry bark shavings and began heating the mixture over a fist-sized ember stone from his pit. "Local fungus. Has anticoagulant properties. Bark'll draw the fluid up," he explained. "You've tested that?" Velhar asked. "On myself? No. On a squirrel thing yesterday? Yes." The Biran froze for a moment, but said nothing as Jack soaked a strip of cloth in the boiling concoction, blew on it, then carefully bound the wound, muttering gentle reassurances as the Atheru cadet spasmed and wheezed. "Keep his head angled. If his throat swells, we need to cut a breathing line," Jack said, already turning toward the injured cadet who'd fallen into the sinkhole. It took them 30 minutes to rig a pulley system with vines and the remnants of a crushed terrain scanner. Jack went down himself. The cadet had cracked 3 ribs, Jack could tell by palpation and the shallow breathing. He didn't try to tape them, just helped him stay upright and taught him how to breathe with the diaphragm. "You're not going to move much," Jack said quietly. "Just focus on staying alive until help shows up." "When is that?" the cadet croaked. Jack didn't answer. He just gave a small shrug and passed him a wad of cloth for support. That night, 6 cadets crowded beneath the overhang with Jack. The rest huddled nearby, staring into the dark. The shelters were gone. The kits were dead. And the only one who seemed remotely composed was the human who had brought a knife and nothing else. Velhar approached Jack at dawn. The Biran's fur was matted, and his translator was glitching. "You've stabilized both casualties," Velhar said. "You took control of the situation without authorization." Jack glanced up from where he was scraping bark with the edge of his blade. "Didn't know survival needed a permission slip." "I flagged you as a risk," Velhar continued. "Unarmed, unprepared, reckless." Jack stood. His shoulders were square, but the exhaustion was finally creeping in around his eyes. "You weren't wrong," he said, "but I'm still standing." Velhar tilted his head. "Where did you learn to treat venom exposure using alien fungi?" Jack sat back down. "Boy Scouts," he said, "and 2 really bad camping trips." Velhar opened his mouth to speak, but stopped as a cadet from the Tralchi, who had quietly watched the entire exchange, stepped forward with a broken piece of visor glass and asked, awkwardly, "Could you show me how you made that water filter?" Jack looked at the cracked glass, then up at the cadet. "Yeah," he said. "Yeah, I can." The rain had stopped, but the damage lingered like a bad dream. 3 survival kits still worked barely. The rest were warped beyond recognition, fizzling quietly in the mud like forgotten toys. The auto kitchens had turned brittle and collapsed. Medpods oozed gel from cracked casings. Half the cadets hadn't eaten in over 12 hours, and the other half were rationing nutrient packs like they were sacred relics. A few tried chewing sterilized filter mesh from their water units. It didn't go well. The worst of it, no one knew how long rescue would take. Coalition protocol dictated a 30-day cycle for deep environment training assessments. Emergency beacons were allowed only if 3 or more lives were at risk. No one wanted to be the one to say it, but with 2 already injured and more systems failing by the hour, that threshold wasn't far off. Jack didn't say much. He moved constantly, gathering fronds, checking wounds, running a finger through soil samples, and occasionally sniffing things the others wouldn't have touched with 10-foot poles. Velhar had stopped objecting after the 3rd time. Jack's guesses proved right. The fire pit was always burning now. Jack kept it going with resin-heavy bark that smoked like an overworked engine but burned hot and long. He'd ring the area with smoke-warding moss to keep away smaller predators. It didn't stop the larger ones from circling the perimeter at night, though. On the 4th day, a cadet named Lur broke down. She was from the Nidari, a silicon-based species known for tactical calm and mathematical precision. She'd spent the first days trying to recalibrate her terrain mapper. Now, she sat beside its melted frame, staring into the middle distance with unfocused eyes. Velhar noticed first. "Cadet Lur, status report," he said gently. She didn't respond. Jack crouched beside her, not touching, just there. "I can't quantify this," she whispered after a moment. "The protocols, none of them work. There's no logic, no systemic resilience. We were told to trust the kits. Why didn't they account for this storm type?" "They did," Jack said. "They just didn't expect it to come this early or this strong. I don't know how to survive without a system." Jack nodded slowly. "That's because you were trained to operate, not adapt." She blinked at him. "Isn't that the same thing?" "No, not even close." He stood, pulled his knife, and cut a stalk of the fibrous weed growing behind her. Then he split it down the center and began weaving it between two charred bits of polyplastic. "What are you making?" she asked. "A fish net. Found signs of water runoff. Bet there's a sink basin nearby." "You're just guessing?" "I'm adjusting." She watched him work for a long time. Then, silently, she joined him. By the end of the 6th day, a shift had started, not officially, but unmistakably. Cadets still wore their badges and reported to Velhar, but when it came to survival, they watched Jack. He showed them how to sharpen rocks into cutting tools, how to test unknown plants by applying sap to skin and waiting for a reaction, how to cook meat thoroughly even when the firewood was wet. He demonstrated how to recognize predator trails and when to leave fake ones to throw them off. When the sink basin was found just over the ridge, with methane-heavy pools and filter moss growing along the edges, Jack was the one who knew what parts were safe to touch and which ones blistered skin on contact. He didn't bark orders, he didn't assign roles, but somehow, people started bringing him things, tools, observations, questions. Velhar tried to reassert structure once, calling for a group strategy meeting. Jack didn't argue. He simply stood nearby while a cadet tried to explain how to reroute power from a burnt AI core into a signal amplifier, only to discover she couldn't strip the wires without a blade. She looked up and sighed. "Jack, could I use your knife?" "Sure," he said, handing it over without fanfare. "Just watch your grip. She's old and bites if you slide wrong." The knife had become its own character, shared cautiously, respected absolutely. It had cleaned wounds, built shelters, carved splints, and even stirred soup. Jack called it Gracie, once, while reshaping a broken solar plate into a cooking pan. "After my grandma," he'd said. No one laughed. It somehow made perfect sense. On the 8th day, Jack twisted his ankle. It happened while collecting firewood beyond the second ridge. He hadn't seen the hole, just a shallow depression masked by moss and leaves. His foot slipped, rolled, and there was a sickening pop, followed by immediate heat and swelling. He didn't scream, but he did curse long and colorfully. He tried walking, got about 6 steps, then sat down and swore again. A nearby cadet heard the noise and rushed over. It was the Fulani again, the one who'd questioned Jack's lack of equipment the first day. He wasn't smirking now. "Jack, are you—" "It's a sprain. Could be a minor fracture. Hurts like a son of a—" "Yes, I'm fine," Jack muttered. The Fulani helped him back, but the limp was obvious. Jack's boot bulged around the swelling. That night, he cut strips from an old thermal blanket and rigged a splint using 2 sturdy rootwood rods. He elevated the leg, packed it with cool clay, and made himself a walking stick the next morning. Every step made his face twitch, but he kept going. "Should rest," Velhar said, watching him stir soup on day 9. "Should," Jack replied, "but then who's going to check the traps? You cannot teach if you collapse." "I'm not teaching," Jack said. "I'm surviving. They're just watching." The Baron looked at him for a long moment, then finally said, "You're in pain." "Yeah." "You're not hiding it." "No point." That, Velhar didn't argue with. By day 12, cadets were rotating jobs, someone on water duty, another on firewood, someone monitoring the injured. Jack had stopped giving instructions. Now, he gave feedback. "That's good stitching," he told Lur as she rebound the rib-injured cadet's torso. "But don't cross the wrap so low, he'll lose expansion. Ribs need room to breathe." She adjusted it without question. "Caught anything?" he asked the Tralchi cadet guarding the pit trap. "Nothing yet, but I added your bait mix. Give it until dusk. Things come sniffing when the heat drops." Even Velhar started checking with Jack before making camp adjustments. When asked about it later, the Baron would only say, "I've read thousands of manuals. None of them taught me how to gut a six-legged boar with a dull rock and a wet sock." On the 14th night, one of the cadets took a shot at humor, raising a dried chunk of meat and saying, "To Gracie, may her edge never dull." Everyone laughed quiet, relieved laughter. Jack smiled but said nothing. He was too busy staring at the sky. The stars were off. Not by much, but enough. Enough to mean the satellite alignment had shifted. Enough to mean they'd need to rig a beacon soon, or miss their best window for detection. He didn't sleep that night. The 16th morning began with blood. One of the perimeter cadets, a Vortil named Senk, limped into camp just after sunrise, panting and bleeding from a shallow gash across the ribs. The wound wasn't deep, but the jagged edges told Jack everything he needed to know. Claws. Jack was by his side instantly, knife already in hand, cutting the cadet's outer wrap away. "Keep pressure here. Not deep, but you were lucky," Jack said. "I didn't see it. Just movement, then pain. It ran, tall, fast." Scouting swipe. Predators do that when they're sizing us up. Senk's eyes widened, his species' triple pupils dilating. "So, it'll come back?" "Not if we convince it that was a mistake," Jack said, already standing. He was walking better barely, but the ankle still protested with every step. The swelling had eased, but the bruising was deep violet now, wrapping around his foot and up the side of his calf. He used a double-wrapped rootwood crutch now. Not elegant. Functional. Jack didn't rest. He had a perimeter to reinforce. Within the hour, he had 6 cadets digging shallow pit traps with sharpened stakes made from shattered visor glass. He slathered the spikes with a mix of fungal rot and moss juice. "Won't kill it," he explained. "But it'll wish it hadn't stepped there." Around the edges of camp, he set noise wards, nothing electronic, just bones tied with dried sinew to rustle in the wind. They weren't alarms, they were warnings. For both sides. Lur helped with the bait smears. "You always assume the worst-case scenario," she noted. Jack glanced at her. "I assume what's likely. And if you're wrong? I'd rather over-prepare with nothing than under-prepare with a corpse." That ended the conversation. By day 18, meat was running low. The native fauna were becoming wary. Jack's traps were still catching rodents and smaller ground pads, but the big one that had slashed Senk hadn't returned, and that meant it was watching, stalking. Predators got smart when they failed once. It wouldn't fail twice. Water, at least, was holding steady. The filter system they'd rigged with quartz, heated sand, and singed cloth was producing just enough safe fluid per day. The Trauchi cadets monitored it obsessively. But fatigue was setting in, deep set, clawing, mental fatigue. Even the smallest tasks, splitting roots, preparing meals, keeping the fire stoked, were beginning to take twice as long. Conversation had shrunk to grunts and short sentences. The injured Atheru cadet still couldn't walk properly, though the venom symptoms had stabilized. The one with the cracked ribs remained mostly silent, moving as little as possible, eating only when prompted. Velhar approached Jack that night. He crouched beside the fire, staring into the flames like they held answers. "Morale is deteriorating. I noticed. Your methods have kept us alive." Jack stirred the coals, then said, "That's not the same as keeping people together." Velhar looked up. "And yet you do that too. With no rank, no command. Why do they follow you?" Jack didn't respond right away. "I don't think they are," he said finally. "I think we're just moving the same direction, for now." Velhar leaned closer. "You were injured. You keep moving. They see that. It gives them something to match." Jack's jaw tensed. "You think I want to be the standard?" "No, but you are." Jack didn't like that. He poked the fire harder than necessary. "I'm just doing what needs doing," he muttered. Velhar stood. "That's all anyone can do. But most don't. That's the difference." On day 21, the storm came back. Not acidic this time, but cold. A sudden thermal inversion pulled frozen methane vapor down from the upper atmosphere. Temperatures dropped 30 degrees in 2 hours. Frost began forming along the camp's outer edges. The fronds Jack had used for walls stiffened and cracked. Hypothermia wasn't just a risk now, it was imminent. The remaining cadets huddled close around the fire, but there wasn't enough shelter for all. The few thermal blankets had been repurposed into insulation for the injured. The rest had to get creative. "We need an emergency enclosure," Jack said through chattering teeth. "With what?" Lur asked. "We're out of fiber." "Not entirely," Jack said. "We've got packs, vests, tent scraps, and a lot of teamwork." The next 2 hours were frantic. They cut open packs and sewed together weatherproof layers with bone needles. The Tralchi cadets secreted mucus that hardened into flexible adhesive. When mixed with heat, they used it to fuse seams. Jack coordinated the design. A half-dome burrowed against the rock face, shielded with mud layers and padded with moss and insulation from cracked visors. He didn't sit once, not even when his ankle turned purple again from overuse. "You're going to cause lasting damage," Velhar said flatly. "Only if we survive long enough for it to matter," Jack muttered. By nightfall, the structure was done. It wasn't pretty. It looked like someone had tried to knit a tent out of garbage and frostbite. But it held heat. That night, for the first time in over a week, no one shivered. Day 23. Jack's ribs hurt now, probably from sleeping half upright on stone, hunched over, keeping pressure off his ankle. His cough had started, too dry, shallow, persistent. But he pushed through it. They needed a beacon. He'd been planning it quietly for days, tracking reflective materials, hoarding fragments of still functional solar plates. When a cadet found a flare casing that hadn't corroded completely, Jack grinned for the first time in a while. "All right," he said, "now we talk rescue." They rigged a signal array from what little remained of the kits. Reflective solar panels formed a triangle, elevated on split sapling stalks, designed to catch orbital light. The flare casing became a launch tube, but the propellant was gone. "Can't fire it," Velhar said. "It's useless." Jack shook his head. "Who said we're firing it?" He packed it with dried resin, powdered spark shroom, and a tightly wrapped fabric wick. Then he showed them the ignition method: 2 quartz stones and a strip of scorched conductor wire. "You're building a smoke flare," Lear said, realization dawning. "Yup, high heat, high color, and enough smoke to choke a mooncat." "When?" "Tomorrow. Based on my tracking, we've got a low-orbit recon satellite making a pass at high noon. If we're lucky, someone's watching." They all stared at him. "How do you know its orbit?" Velhar asked. Jack gave a tired smile. "Sky's been off since day 12. I tracked the constellation drift, used to teach astronomy at a scout camp." No one spoke. Finally, Lear said, "That's improbable." Jack's smile widened. "That's humans for you." Day 24. Everyone was on edge. The beacon was in place, the flare was packed, the sky was clear, the air was dry. Jack sat on a stone, his legs stretched out in front of him, the crutch resting nearby. His hands trembled slightly, not from nerves, but cold and fatigue. He didn't hide it anymore. He'd taught them all he could. The rest was luck and orbital math. High noon came. Jack lit the wick. It caught fast, too fast, and everyone backed away as the flare screamed upward in a short arc, then exploded in a burst of color and smoke. Purple and orange plumes spiraled into the air, thick enough to be seen from miles off. Then they waited. 5 minutes. 10. 15. Some began to murmur. Others stared skyward with hollow eyes. Jack stood wobbly and reached for his crutch. Then the sound came, a low, rhythmic thrum, like distant thunder. A dropship broke the clouds. The cadets didn't cheer. They didn't cry. They just watched, silent, stunned, and suddenly very still. Velhar exhaled, long and slow. "You did it." Jack didn't reply. He just sat back down, let the crutch fall to the side, and muttered, "Finally." Then he passed out. The next thing Jack felt was cold air and antiseptic. He opened his eyes to see white lights overhead, far too bright after weeks of orange fire and gray sky. His throat was dry, his ankle burned under a tight brace. A soft beeping pulsed beside him, steady, clinical, alive. "Welcome back," someone said. He blinked. A coalition medic leaned into view, mask down, eyes wide. "Don't move too fast. You're on a dropship, en route to the capital outpost. You were found unconscious with a body temperature of 94 degrees Fahrenheit, mild dehydration, and a partially torn lateral ligament in your right ankle. You've been out 6 hours." Jack tried to sit up. Bad idea. Pain flared through his ribs and leg. He hissed softly. "Yeah," he said hoarsely, "that tracks." The medic looked over his shoulder. "Commander Velhar? He's awake." Velhar stepped into view, fur still matted but cleaned of grime. His uniform, what was left of it, had been sterilized and patched. He looked smaller without the armor plating, almost gentle. "You had us worried," Velhar said. Jack eased himself up against the cot rail. "Everyone make it?" The Baron's ears flicked once. All 20 cadets survived. 2 remain in medbay observation for respiratory distress, but stable. Senk's laceration healed well. Lura's vitals are normal, though she's refusing neural sedation until she confirms you're conscious. Jack exhaled, eyes closing briefly. "Good. That's good." Velhar studied him for a long moment. "You haven't asked about yourself." Jack gave a lopsided smile. "Guess I already know the answer?" Second-degree ankle sprain, torn ligament fibers, mild concussion, cracked rib possibly too. You should have been immobile. "Yeah, well, didn't have the option." The medic adjusted his IV line and frowned. "You should have been using that ankle as little as possible." Jack glanced at her. "If I didn't, half your patients would still be out there." She hesitated, then nodded once. "Fair enough." They landed 2 hours later at the Coalition Medical Center on Orbital Station Halcyon. The cadets were separated by species for triage, their bio readings flickering across the decontamination screens. Jack was the last one off the ship. His leg was immobilized, but he refused the hover chair. "I can walk," he said. "You can limp," the medic corrected. "Good enough." They led him through clean corridors lined with curious onlookers, officers, medtechs, envoys. Everyone had heard by now. 20 cadets, 27 days on Zeta V, no fatalities. Survival odds before the mission, 37%. Actual outcome, 100. And the human? He brought a knife. Inside the med wing, Lear intercepted him before the door sealed. Her uniform was crisp again, though the faint scarring around her neck hinted at stress lesions from the cold exposure. She looked at him, expression unreadable. "I recalculated the data," she said. "Statistically, our group should have lost 6 members in the first storm alone." Jack nodded. "Sounds about right." "You changed the variable." "Maybe." "You shouldn't have been able to." Jack leaned on his crutch. "Shouldn't doesn't mean can't." Lear stared for a moment, then reached into her pocket and produced something small and blackened his knife. The steel was scorched and pitted, handle wrapped in soot-stained cloth. She'd cleaned it carefully, though the edge was still nicked. "I kept it safe," she said softly. Jack took it from her with both hands, thumb brushing the old engraving near the hilt Gracie. "Thanks," he said quietly. "She saved us." He looked up. "Not her. You did." Later, Velhar called him to a debrief room, a wide, sterile chamber overlooking the station's rotation arc. 2 officers from the Galactic Training Commission sat across the table. One was a reptilian Arxan, the other a humanoid from the Aral colonies. They looked at him like he was both a curiosity and a paradox. "Captain Jack Harland, Earth Delegation," the Arxan began. "You are aware your assigned survival kit was incomplete." "Wasn't incomplete," Jack said. "Just didn't need the rest." The Iral's brow furrowed. "You violated standard preparedness regulation. That could have resulted in fatalities." Jack nodded. "Could have. Didn't." The Arxan's tail flicked once. "You improvised untested field medicine using unknown fungi. They worked. You diagnosed multiple injuries without a scanner. I had patients breathing when your scanners melted. I'll take those odds." They exchanged a glance. Velhar, seated nearby, said nothing, just observed. Finally, the Aral leaned forward. "Explain your reasoning," he said. "Why bring only a blade?" Jack rubbed his neck. "Because gear fails, people panic, machines short out. But hands, fire, and patience, those stay. That's not regulation. It's survival." Silence hung for a moment. Velhar finally spoke. "If I may," his reasoning proved correct. "Our kits became liabilities. His simplicity became strength. Without him, none of us would be here." The Iril tapped something on his tablet. "Noted." Jack shifted uncomfortably. "Look, I'm not looking for trouble. Or medals. Just coffee and maybe a chair with fewer questions attached." The Arxan's eyes narrowed. "You declined commendation?" Absolutely. The room went still. Then, slowly, Velhar's fur lifted in amusement. You remain consistent. 3 days later, Jack was allowed to walk unassisted again. The brace held his ankle stable, though he still moved cautiously. The cracked rib had started knitting, painful but healing. The medical staff estimated full recovery in 6 weeks. Assuming he followed rehab protocols. He promised he would, knowing he wouldn't entirely. That evening, he found Lear and Senk in the med hall cafeteria. The food was bland but warm, the first proper meal they'd had in almost a month. Lear was explaining the recalibrated signal data to a pair of curious techs. Senk was quietly cutting his food into perfect geometric slices. Jack dropped onto the bench across from them. You two look better, he said. You look worse, Senk replied, deadpan. Jack chuckled. Probably true. Lear leaned forward. They're going to add your field notes to the Coalition's training archive. My what? Your methods, the fungus antiseptic, the root splinting, the smoke flare calculations. They're calling it adaptive survival under technological loss. Jack groaned softly. Sounds like homework. It's already mandatory reading. He raised an eyebrow. For real? For real. Jack sat back. That's terrifying. Senk smirked faintly. For once, we agree. A week later, Jack was released from medbay. The official ceremony followed 2 days after a formal recognition broadcast station-wide. He hadn't wanted to attend, but Velhar made it sound like an order rather than a suggestion. The hall was packed. Banners of 20 species hung from the ceiling. The air shimmered with translation fields. In the center stood a display pedestal under a transparent shield. On it lay a single object. The knife. Polished now, but still scarred. The edge bore the faint engraving, Gracie. Beneath it, the plaque read, Item #58, Human. Jack stood at the back, leaning on his brace, arms crossed. When the announcer called his name, applause echoed through the chamber, soft at first, then building into something thunderous. Velhar approached him afterward, his posture formal, eyes bright. You declined the medal, yet you came. Jack shrugged. Didn't want to be rude. Do you regret anything? He looked at the knife, the reflection of light on its battered steel. Yeah, he said after a moment. Should have brought coffee. Velhar gave a soft laugh, a rare sound. I suspected as much. They stood together in quiet for a while as the crowd dispersed. Outside the hall, the stars turned slowly beyond the viewport, cold and steady. Jack exhaled through his nose. You know, he said, people keep calling it luck. But it wasn't luck, it was just not stopping, trying things until something worked. Velhar regarded him curiously. That is your philosophy of survival? That's humanity's philosophy, Jack said. We don't survive because we're strong, we survive because we don't stop trying things that shouldn't work. The Baron nodded slowly, gaze thoughtful. Then perhaps the Coalition should study that as well. Good luck fitting it in a manual, Jack said, and smiled. Velhar looked back toward the display case. For what it's worth, I voted for your commendation. I thought you'd refuse. You thought right. Velhar's fur rippled again in what passed for a grin. Then let me offer something simpler. You have my respect. Jack's eyes softened. That's enough. That night, Jack sat alone in the quiet dormitory assigned for debriefing personnel. His brace was propped beside the bunk. The dull ache in his leg pulsed with his heartbeat. Outside, Halcyon's rotation shimmered against the void, an unbroken circle of light. He took out a small paper cup of coffee, terrible, instant, lukewarm, and raised it slightly toward the window. To Gracie, he murmured, and to getting out alive. Then he drank, grimaced, and added under his breath, still terrible. Outside, Zeta V spun unseen and indifferent, its storm still raging. But somewhere in the galactic survival hall, behind glass and light, a single human knife rested beneath a simple inscription, a reminder that sometimes the simplest tool in the universe was the one holding on.